Hey there. I wanted to take some time and walk you through my process for creating characters and character design for this field guide I'm working on called the Ghostwoods. And as you can see, it features, and if you've seen any of my other content, it features anthropomorphized animals. That's the whole premise of the Ghostwood. It's that it's somehow touched magically. So I wanted to start by taking you through my process. So you can see here I've got a frog on this illustration board. This is some Bristol paper, and I'm using Sumi ink, and I believe the brand is Yasudomo. Um, I probably butchered that, so you'll have to excuse me. But basically, right now I'm mixing up that ink, and I'm throwing that all together on the artist palette, and then really just getting to creating some values for the illustration. So the frog character here is my idea is he's a bard. I'm kind of aping off that thought that, like Kermit the Frog, he's got a very Kermity collar. He's playing a mandolin, but it's kind of like a banjo. So maybe it's a little tongue-in-cheek reference to, the Muppets. Um, and that's the kind of the premise. So I hope you follow through this process. I hope you can learn something, and ultimately, maybe use this in your own work. Because I know for me, one of my biggest challenges when I started creating work was taking it from this point, which I like a lot, this physical medium, and going digital with it. The physical always worked fine. I have really good connection with my hands. I always had good hand-eye coordination. I can typically take something, ink it or paint it, and it comes out how I want it, but it really never is production quality, right? I can't take that to digital. And when I went down to graphic design school, that was one of the things I really struggled with. It was one of my main goals, was really, okay, I can get this thing, it can look fine for a sketchbook or in person, but really reproducibility online and for marketing purposes and something you could put in a book or print out in a poster was always a challenge. And so that's been one thing that I've always struggled with. And I think I found a good process, and I want to share that with everybody. Now, this process is really basic, and if you've seen some of my other videos, you kind of know that really what I'm trying to do is just lay in some basic values for the character. I'm trying to give some texture so that when I do go to color this, I'm not losing what makes, in my mind, this piece me, right? I'm not losing that 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 quality that I feel connects this to my style, which is, for lack of a better term, it's kind of quaint. It's kind of like charming, cute, I guess. I know I've explained it before like that, but the idea being it's supposed to have a rustic quality, even though it will be polished at the end. I think there's a lot of California Art Institute kind of that Cal Arts thought process in here. I'm never went to school for animation or anything like that. I went to school for graphic design, but the idea is it's simple characters. They're things that really anyone could draw, right? I don't think this is an overly complex character, but it has a clear read and it has a unique style, and it feels the same as the other characters, quite frankly, that inhabit this world. But it's also just, in my mind, something that I want to look at, something that doesn't gross me out, doesn't creep me out. It's not overly sexual. I don't have a problem with that. I actually really love pinup art. It's one of the things that really got me into graphic design in the first place. Works with Gil Elfgreen, J. Scott Campbell, Arthur Adams. There's a ton of them that really, gosh, who am I thinking of? The father of Art Nouveau. I'm going to kick myself in the butt for not knowing that one. Polish guy, worked in Paris, did all the stuff for the that really just was the spaghetti-haired girls Art Nouveau movement. Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent, and this is a long video. So if you like listening to people ramble, well, you're in luck. If you just want to see my process, then feel free to turn on off the music. You're not going to miss anything, super dynamic here. Anyways, so the thought process again is that I'm looking for shapes that are identifiable. Like the head's a circle, like straight up. The eyeballs are meant to be spheres, and I'm not going to try to. I'm not attempting to make this like a Hollywood level, like, oh, it's a very polished, realistic looking character. I'm looking for a cartoony looking character, something that would be at home in a younger kids comic or a picture book, or even even something like a cartoon, and that's the whole premise. So the thing that I did do differently here is, and in some cases I probably wouldn't, is I have used some different colored inks to bring in some color in the legs, at the knees, and then I also do it at the bottom of the feet. And the reason for that is I was just trying to use that texture for something else. Just trying to bring in a little bit more texture, a little bit more color, a little more value where I could. Something that I did too here that I don't know how well it works, you'll have to tell me once you see the final piece, is I created a pattern, a really simple pattern of lily pads for the inside of the cloak. And those, part of the problem with those is they get shrunk down, and so they lose a little bit of their line weight. And so when the line weight doesn't match in quality, you tend to kind of see that. But overall, I think there's something charming about it, and it came off really well. There wasn't a problem like I had with one of the more recent pieces I worked on, the sheep. I didn't have the issue with like drawing a nose too dark or a hoof that I had to correct in post. Like this is pretty much straight up process where I was just able to use the basic tools that are at my disposal to really get the line work looking nice and crisp, which is nice that I didn't have to do then any cover up work. All right, now that I've finished the inking, I've scanned the whole thing at 600 dpi on a large flat pad scanner. Now this picture is only 8.5 by 11 letter size Bristol, so it didn't need the large flat pad scanner, but that's really useful. One thing I did notice as I was going through this is that I think I drew the character too small, because what tends to happen is the larger you draw, your ability to shrink it down is much easier. And so this guy has a lot of smudges and kind of like line leak that was unintended. A lot of that is probably due to the size, because we're really zooming in here. Whereas a larger character, you wouldn't have to if you drew it larger. You would have it'd be a bit more forgiving. And for those of you who are using this as kind of a learning tool, I would definitely say is that I'm doing this a bit backwards, in that usually what I would do is do some other color correction so that I could use some of the really basic tools that are built into Photoshop to get the white out. But because so much of the frog's texture is the ink painting on the inside of his arms and his cloak are very close to white, I didn't really have the ability to then say, okay, all of this needs to go. So I had to do a vector mask essentially for all the line work, which is okay because it's something that I've got a lot of experience in Illustrator. So vector masks like this are really simple. These tend to be really easy. What I find the thing that people get caught up on is even if you're experienced in Illustrator, is the vector, the pen tool works different in Photoshop in my mind. There's some things about it that are much easier. Like it almost always is defaults to this kind of curved line. You have to be very specific to say, no, I want you to be a nice straight even line. So that's kind of nice, because then you're not with these characters of drawing, they're more organic. I don't have to worry about drawing a lot of straight lines, and you can see there's almost none in here. These are almost all Bezier handles that are being brought out to pretty extreme angles. I'm trying to use as few as possible, because honestly, the whole point of the work is these identifiable curves. I'm using templates and Bezier curves for the drawing, so shouldn't I try to replicate that in this cleanup work? And I think that works for me, at least to make it that transition from the physical medium to the digital medium mean something. It's not just taking it straight in and doing a kind of a piss poor scan and then wondering why your results don't work, right? So, and I'm going to tangentially talk a little bit about this here, is that a lot of times what I find works really well when you're scanning these things in is, of course, scan higher DPI than you think you need. So there's a scan again at 600 DPI. I don't need 600 DPI. That's ridiculous. And for a larger piece, I may not, because it would just chug my computer. But I remember working on my first few pieces of scan work and just looking at the file size and the gigs and freaking out. This is not quite as bad, but some of these can be pretty big. I think Photoshop and my computer are up to the task now, but I remember my first Photoshop was like Photoshop Lite on my laptop that really only ran World of Warcraft, and it was chugging on these larger files. We had a couple crashes, this had sad times. So, but what I'd say is, when you're doing these scans, make sure that when you're using the scan bed, you use the tools in the scan bed to get some of the results you might be looking for. So tweak your contrast, tweak your gamma values. Most of the scan bed utilities offer those. Really, maybe even take two images and with different gamma values and blend them together. I do that a lot, especially when I have really contrasting values. So if I have a dark black and a bright white, them both looking right, and then all the grays in between looking perfect in the in-between, is highly unlikely. So being able to use masks appropriately and clean up that line work, and maybe merging two different identical pieces of line work that you have at different values is really going to help you here. And that's one of those things where I know, for me, when I put scan line work into Photoshop, I either hate it or love it immediately. And that can really put me off on continuing on working on it. I think as an artist who doesn't have that natural, I have to do this all the time passion, and this is something that I need to habitually do in order to be good at it and to establish good habits, not liking something when I see it inside a program is the quickest way to make me stop working on it. And you can see I don't make masks often enough. I'm looking for the mask control, which I think is Command 7 or Control 7. I forget. And I figure it out eventually. The cool thing, of course, about vector masks is you can add to vector masks if you do it right. And I think I stumbled here for a little while getting there, but eventually we do, and we get vector masks that work for our character and also help us create more clean line work. And then, as well as, we're able to take some shortcuts on the cleanup on the outside areas, the areas that are well outside the drawing that might have an errant hair or just a natural piece of fiber in the Bristol that is darker. We're able to then use that to our advantage. So as we continue to clean up this piece, I think it's important to talk about cleanup as a necessary step in making line work usable for digital work. I don't think there's ever been a piece where I've taken it straight from the scan and put it into Photoshop and not had to do quite a bit of this cleanup here. And that's just because the the way our hand works, the way that we carry through lines, through other lines, natural smudges, the oils in our hand sticking to the page. If you're inking it like I am, you're going to have ink that goes over the pencil work. You have to be willing to go in there and really clean up your work to the degree that you think it needs to be cleaned up. So the benefit of working in a style like this that is intended to be messier, intended to be cute, for lack of a better term, right, is that if I have a piece of line work that goes beyond where I normally would intend it to go, that's can be kind of considered an intentional line, right? These little hash marks on the brim of the hat you see here, right? These, they're kind of just like fakey texture lines, right? They're very they make the thing look rougher than it is. They make it have more character. Well, that's just that just makes it easy. You can see the line of the plane of the ground here creeps into the brim of the hat. Now I can clean that up, but why bother? I think that it reads like it's supposed to, and it feels, and the character of it feels right. As we keep moving along here, you can see that I've duplicated the line art layer to try to use what we call, I think it's called color threshold or value threshold. Basically, if you double click any layer, what you can do is you can tell it to ignore or pass through colors that fall within a certain threshold. So you can double click it and say, I want any color that's not, 250 white, or 250 gray or higher to just fall through and be this checkerboard pattern, which is of course your alpha channel. The problem with that, like I said, is that when you have an art piece that is not, it has values that are too close together, or maybe your grays aren't as gray you thought they were, or they're a little overexposed or underexposed, is you're going to run into issues like you're seeing here, where you have very light or non-colored parts that are going to fall through. Now, how important it is for us to capture that information. Let's take a look right in the leaves here of this cattail. There's a little bit of texture there, right? Is that texture you want to keep? Is it important enough to keep? In this case, it was for me. And it wasn't a ton of work to throw another marquee over there. And basically what I'm doing is I'm adding to the vector mask in the original layer to show that one. And really just make some choices here, like, hey, I'm gonna have this be more apparent. But because it's a vector mask, I'm still leaving the alpha channel intact. I'm just using this overlay layer as a way to get some of my lines in there. Like you could see, like the trails of the flies, and the flies themselves are completely black. So I don't want any of the white information with those, or very little of it, and maybe not most of the gray information. But with the cattails and some of these other things, I do want that white information. So I have to, kind of do some extra work to get everything done here. So, I'm tweaking that threshold tool even further to attempt to get rid of things that I don't want. You can see a dark thing here. Where'd that come from? I don't know, right? Though overall, I like the little fly tails. They look messy, like they would, right? Like they should. Like stink lines should be messy. The path of a bee should look messy. The path of a fly or any insect should be, in my style at least, should kind of be rough and messy. All right. So getting back in here, we're still cleaning up some of these splotches of ink around the eye. Again, you could leave those in. In this case, I haven't, but it's no problem. Also, I could mention you could use a lot of these tools to smooth out some of these areas where we have like which should be a gradation of color, which is kind of hard to pull off with watercolors or inks. I'm not a master with it by any means, and I'm probably not using enough water. I'm certainly not using the 100% appropriate medium. Bristol paper is not really meant for watercolors as far as I'm concerned. It's meant for, inking with micron pens and using technical pencils for, right? And that's what the quality I like about it, though. I use technical pencils. I use the Pentels. Let me see if I have any of those handy. It's the Pentel, the 0.3, the 0.5, and the 0.7, the graphic gear 1000s. So they're fantastic. I discovered them in design school. They're like drafting pens. But I also use a lead holder. That's kind of my everyday drawing. It's a Prismacolor turquoise. So it's one of those ones that's supposed to, it can hold a turquoise, like colored pencil lead that doesn't show up in, you can color it out. You can screen it out in your scans. But I just have regular HB lead in it. I find that to be one of my favorite tools. It's got a nice knurled handle, and the lead isn't super soft. It doesn't break really easily. It's not particularly expensive. I think the lead holder was like $16, which seems a little bit pricey, and the lead themselves I think was like $8, which is great. And there's a great drafting section at my art store local to me. So I'm using precise tools, and that's why I want a Bristol board. I'm using like little tiny Mono Zero 2.3 Tombow erasers, and then also I hate that to change the name about this. Isn't it the weirdest thing? I have this Factus by General. I think it's a 0.5. No, there's no way. 5 mil eraser. That white eraser. It's a refillable. They're fantastic. And like lots of templates, lots of circle and ellipse templates, Bezier curves. That really, I need the Bristol paper, which has that soft feel. It's like that soft characteristic, but it also is precise. It doesn't want to smudge naturally too much. It doesn't want to make unspecific lines. It wants to make specific lines. All right, and then we're almost near the end here, where we've got basically all of this marqueing and Bezier curve work done, and we're about to move away from. We're about to move on to the next step, which will be our flat colors. So I'm going to address that in part 2 of this 3-part series. So this first part was all inking and scanning, and I hope that you learned something, not just by watching, but kind of like some tips and tricks that I've been able to pass on here. There's really no getting around the work, right? But what we can do is we can use these tools to our advantage and know that they'll do something, and they'll get to a place where we can be happy with the work. Because there's nothing less appealing than doing the work and then not being happy with it, because this whole process, I think, took me 3 hours. It spent about ×3 here, and ultimately that's a lot of time to spend on any art piece that you just want to throw away in the end. And then the third portion of this series is going to focus on the shading and my kind of the color tips that will take us to finished product. So you can see that there's quite a bit of work there. If you're to multiply each of these videos times 3, we're looking at 90 minutes of work to get through the inking and the line work cleanup here. I think some of the line work cleanup I did in an order that really wasn't necessary, but it's okay. And then this is always something that I like to do before I put a piece to bed is get the texture in there. And the reason why is because then it's shareable, first of all, on social media, because there's a lot of information, it adds a lot of vibrancy. You can see there's a clear contrast between the background, which before was a PNG layer, and the foreground, which is this kind of nice cream-colored white with this dark black line quality. And then you get that together, and then you can put this thing to bed and then kind of feel better about the places it's in. It looks more finished. Like you could see this, I could see this quality being like, hey, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to take it this far. I'm not going to take it any further and put it in. Sometimes I do that for some of the pieces, especially in the Ghostwood, especially like call outs to things that I feel like the author of the Ghostwood's field guide doesn't have the intent to ever color, whereas the other more finished work he does. And that's kind of a good authoring excuse or good like editorial excuse for being lazy. But anyways, this part, like I said, was, as this is what I was referring to earlier, is challenged in the making the pattern for the lily pads on the inside of the cloak. So again, using Bezier curves, using the pen tool to our advantage, so that we can make a vector mask, or yeah, a vector mask for the thing to live in. This actually ends up being just a regular mask. Using the selection tool and just saying, yeah, you know what, that's fine. A little aliasing is okay here. But I've got this and I'm building it in, and I'm going to pull the pattern up and shrink it in with that there and duplicate it. So as we reach the final few moments of me fooling around here and getting everything just right, I'm also building an outline in right now, I believe, to kind of make sure that I get that set up, because I feel like that white separation is something that's I put in a lot of my work, especially my vector work. But I'm also looking here for errant lines, places that I needed to do a little bit more cleanup. Um, but using the selections, using expands, those are important. But anyways, as we go, in closing, what I'd like to say is, if you like the video or you learned something, please give me a like. I appreciate any support. And if you can see yourself using any of the tips or tricks in my channel, or that I use as part of my process, please, I would appreciate your subscription as well. You can find me in all the usual places. Links are going to be in my bio, as well as in the bottom portion of this video. And if you have any comments or questions about future video content, uh, ideas for new character, for different characters, or really any thoughts about art, design, illustration in general, let me know. I'm open to them. I I really have want to take this time. We're, if obviously, if you look at the date this post, this is during a kind of uncertain time, and I'm really trying to take that time to be productive and do more with the free time that I have, but also hopefully build some better habits and grow as an artist as well as a content creator, because I think there's value in that, is using this time for that. Anyways, now to get off my soapbox. Again, thanks so much for your review. Please enjoy the last few minutes of silence as we get this thing ready for our flats, and I hope you'll join me for the second part of the series, where we go over creating our flat colors and moving on to our basic coloring. Thanks again. Bye.